There are a ton of cheap horror games on Steam. People see something like Slender or Five Nights at Freddy's become a viral success. They see a game about a guy in a dark room with a flashlight making tons of money, and they go, "Piss, that's easy! I can make one of those!" And so Steam gets swamped with generic horror games where you're walking around an environment so dark you can see a reflection in your computer screen, with generic people in masks jumping out and screaming boo at you, all trying to ride the hype train of something that's more successful. And then you have games like Despair, which aim to be one of those generic dime a dozen horror games, but is so incompetent that it fails even to do that correctly. First hurdle to clear, the game runs like total shit. Fraps clocked the opening cutscene, where we watch a motionless girl sitting in a motionless train car in a subway, running at 12 frames per second, and the menu is so bad the mouse takes about a full second to move where I tell it to. Maybe there are some graphic settings I can change to make this run better. There are, but they crashed the game. Piss. So I guess persistent single-digit frame rates are just the first of many terrors that await you. You play as an anonymous girl who wakes up on a deserted derailed subway car, and you're prompted to explore and figure out what happened. Oh good god, this camera is atrocious. As a lovely side effect of the frame rate being drunk off its ass, the camera lurches whenever I try to move it. It pops from angle to angle like a spastic bird turning its head. I deeply apologize to you for having to watch this, but imagine having to play this with the camera sputtering and spastically jerking every time you try to look at something. This is awful! I shit you not, I have to pick up items by moving the mouse and just hoping the cursor lands on the item after the lag runs out. So here's how the game goes. You wander down a completely empty subway tunnel where you find a flashlight and 2 bloody notes. Slender called, he wants his overused cliches back. At least I think that's what he said. All I heard was Why is the readout for batteries written in Russian? Could they not find how to write battery in English, or is it a glitch with the language options? I can't pick up this note. Come on, you piece of shit. Whoop. Well, here's hoping you don't need all these notes to beat the game. Where the hell do I go to get out of here? All the vents are sealed. Oh, now I can pick up the note. Great, now let's get on our way. I said let's get on our... It won't go away. This damn note won't exit the screen. Get off! Get off! You know it's a bad sign when I can't get out of the starting area without running into game-breaking bugs. Could you imagine getting halfway through or almost to the end of the game and having this happen to you? You'd have no choice but to start over. You can't play like this. Anyway, you walk through an empty subway tunnel where nothing happens. That leads to some kind of ventilation area you walk through while nothing happens. That leads to what looks like a series of office storage rooms that you walk through while nothing happens. This leads to a maintenance area of some kind. To proceed, you need to look for a valve to somehow fix a flooded hallway, which you search for while nothing happens. The flooded hall leads to an empty apartment building that you walk through while nothing happens. You go through another maintenance area which somehow leads back to a new subway, all of which you walk through while nothing happens. And then the game freezes. I got on a subway train because there was nowhere else to go, and now I can't get out of this screen. I looked up an online walkthrough. Turns out this is the end of the game. It just glitched and the ending didn't load properly. I'm not going through all that shit again. Did I say this was a horror game? That might have been generous. It barely even tries to scare you, and it's barely a game in the first place. The entire game is just walking through empty hall after empty hall while absolutely nothing happens. Nothing attacks you. Nothing is stalking you. Nothing is trying to kill you. There is no enemy. You walk through empty rooms, and that's it. There is no game here. There are only 2 points in the entire game where it's physically possible to die that I know of, and both are pre-scripted. Once if you loiter in the opening area for too long and get hit by a train, and once during the one time the ghost actually attacks you. Well, it doesn't so much attack you as it kind of pitifully chases after you, and you escape by doing 3 quick time events, which amounts to pressing E 3 times with the slowest reflexes ever recorded. This is the one action sequence in the entire game. I can't over-exaggerate this. It's just walking! Scares? You're expecting scares in a horror game? Well, eat shit. The ghost appears twice in the entire game. You have a hallucination where the ghost just kind of stands behind you but doesn't do anything, and the aforementioned pitiful chase that's so easy to evade that any pretense of horror gets sucked out in airlock. I'm not joking when I say those are the only times the ghost actually appears. The game only even attempts to scare you 2 times. It's like the game developer just thought, oh, the entire game world is dark. That should be scary enough, right? Yeah. Dark rooms are inherently scary because we're expecting the monster to jump out at us from any corner. Your players are not stupid. 10 minutes straight with nothing happening, and we catch on to the fact that the darkness is just smoke and mirrors. You can't just turn all the lights out and call your game a horror title, and being impossible to see is the closest thing to an actual mechanic this entire piece of shit has to offer. On top of it all, you walk like an elderly gentleman in dire need of a hip replacement, and it takes freaking forever to get anywhere, making the game even more balls-achingly boring than it was already. And I've heard there is a run button, but you're not told about it, and I didn't find it on accident. So we're stuck with a movement speed that would lose a foot race to one of those robot vacuum things. And even on top of the complete lack of gameplay, the rampant glitches, and the piss-poor frame rate, the game is horrendously designed. The game world is so pitch black that it's often impossible to see what you're doing unless you have the flashlight turned on. You're barely given enough batteries to last you the entire game. There's 5, maybe 6 tops, and the game is littered with paths that lead to nowhere just to waste your goddamn batteries. These catwalks that completely surround this room here, yeah, there's nothing up there, but you can wander around up there and flush most of a battery down the toilet. You run out of power and get stranded in the dark, pretty much leaving you boned beyond all reason just because you didn't magically know exactly where the game wanted you to go. There were 2 or 3 times in my playthrough I ran out of batteries and couldn't find spares, and I was pretty much just forced to bungle around in the dark, hoping I'd stumble onto something that would advance the game. Yeah, stare at this completely blank screen. This is actual gameplay footage of this game. I see a red door and I want it painted black. No colors anymore, I want them to turn black. Frankly, I'm surprised I even beat the damn thing, considering the valve you need to collect in the maintenance area is hidden in a tiny secluded hallway you can barely find even with the damn flashlight, and getting stuck in the dark isn't scary because you've long since figured out there are no enemies or hazards. It's just a titanic pain in the ass! The killer is, I'm playing a patched version of the game that's had several extraneous paths sealed off from the original release. The game used to be a goddamn labyrinth with a time limit. Find the path that magically advances the game before the batteries die and you're trying to navigate a black screen. What's interesting is that if you die, you get sent back to the beginning of the game, but you keep any batteries you had when you got killed. As such, committing suicide to stockpile batteries at the start of the game is probably the best way to play. Of course, when you respawn, the controls lock up and you're completely motionless until you pause and click continue. A glitch last seen in Air Control, by the way. The design of the game is just really random. Subway leads to office supply rooms, leads to maintenance area. It makes me wonder if the developer just found a few random maps on a Unity store, wanted to paint it black, and stapled them end-to-end Human Centipede style. The complete failure at building atmosphere is astounding. These are completely normal, run-of-the-mill locations, just with blackout goggles glued to your face. Darkness is not atmosphere. I get the feeling there's supposed to be some kind of meta-psychological plot where all this is a fever dream or hallucination or something, but there's so little context to the game that if there is a subliminal plot, it's impossible to pick up on. The game's got no story, and I mean zero freaking story. You're just walking through abandoned locations with no explanation or context. The cliché storm notes that you find scattered around imply that your character was responsible for someone's death, and a brief hallucination with children's voices implies it happened when they were kids, but that's the absolute full extent of story that you get. You're just walking around with no objective, wondering what in the hell you're even doing. Even worse, the game just cuts off with nothing of what was implied to be story resolved, and nothing really accomplished. You want to know how that ending that didn't load plays out? You get on a subway car, you see the ghost through a window, and the game says to be continued. Okay, 1, to be continued? Really? You didn't have any ideas for the first game and you want to make sequels? 2, this completely ordinary, cheap-looking woman in a Michael Myers mask is supposed to be your ghost? Huh. Maybe never encountering the ghost was the right call. I'd be embarrassed to have people look at that too. I could understand if they were just teasing the ghost to build suspense for when you finally face it, but the game cuts off before you have any direct encounter with the ghost. It's all build up, assuming that's what they were even going for, with no payoff. It's like sitting through Jaws or the new Godzilla, only getting tiny glimpses of the monster, and then the power goes out and the movie cuts off before the ending where you actually see the damn thing doing something. So let's recap, shall we? The game runs like shit, there's a ton of fundamental game-breaking glitches, there's basically no gameplay, this supposed horror game has a grand total of 2 scares to it, there's no story, and even the slight hint of implicit story just cuts off with no resolution. Basically nothing happens across the entire game, it's boring as hell, infuriating to play, horribly designed, the entirety of the game is nothing but you walking around empty rooms slowly trying to figure out where you're supposed to go. You can effectively replicate the game by fiddling with the controller while staring at a blank TV screen, and the game is only half an hour long, assuming you don't get lost. This has got to be one of the worst horror games on Steam. A lot of crappy horror games spam you with jump scares to appeal to YouTube screamers, but god damn, at least they try to be scary. This is just a walking simulator set in a blackout, and even that feels generous, and it's a hideously poorly made one at that. And the developer seems to be Russian, so let's try putting it this way. Software shit, comrade.